Hello, welcome to another of the Inner Adventure series, a series where nature, ecology, and human psychology meet. I am Lutz Otto. I'm a walking wilderness guide as well as business consultant. My co-host, Dr. Ken Jennings, sitting in Germany right now, is a psychologist in private practice. It's been an incredible exploration of where nature and the human psychology meet. And I think both Ken and I felt that it's time that we bring in another element. We've got a special guest today, Mark Joseph. He's one of South Africa's leading mindfulness practitioners. He's been teaching mindfulness for over 20 years. We've known one another for plus 30 years, and Mark will be co-hosting our upcoming mindfulness walking safari. Welcome, Mark. Real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Lutz, and thanks, Dr. Ken, for inviting me today. I feel very privileged and honored, and it's nice to connect with you again, Lutz. It's been, we've known each other for a very long time, and it's amazing how we sort of chose what we love to do. We gave up the corporate life, and Lutz, has a successful bush enterprise going into the bush, and I've gone into mindfulness, I was a managing director of my business. I left it, of an advertising company, and I went full-time into mindfulness. And I'm sure, Dr. Ken, you following your passion and your heart as well.
Yes.
So I think that's something that connects us right from the get-go, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting about changes one makes in one's life, Mark. You spoke about, working in the corporate world and so on. Do you want to just expand a little bit on that? I mean, what activated the change, for you to move from corporate into becoming a mindfulness practitioner as such?
Well, I've always been interested in mindfulness, Dr. Ken, from the age, I was born anxious. And there's a lot of scientific evidence as how stress affects our DNA. So my parents are very, very highly stressed. I was stressed at school. I didn't know any calming techniques. I would always be nauseous. I'd be the kid vomiting in the bathroom before exams. And it's a long story, but I found mindfulness through my own personal struggle. My father committed suicide when I was 21. And it was a long journey, and I eventually found mindfulness. I was very fortunate to have been introduced to it by a lady that taught me to breathe. And I thought, and it worked, and my panic started to subside, and I felt a lot better. And I thought to myself, why is no one being taught these natural techniques?
Yes.
Of breathing, of just calming the mind? And so my journey took me on I went on a long journey. I traveled, I lived with Lutz in London. Then I went from there to India. And then after India and the Himalayas for a year, I lived in a monastery for 3 years. But I realized I didn't want to be a monk. I was too naughty. And I met my lovely wife, and we had a son. But still, my passion for educating people on mental health, and the active component for that is the mental fitness part of that is mindfulness. And I think what really fueled me is that I came in contact with a company called Mindful Revolution that were already operating in the corporate world for the last 6 years. A very, very high-end, extremely skilled company. And they started dangling a carrot in front of me saying, please come and join us, please come and join us. And that was about 2 years ago. And then I started having stressful problems with my business partner in the advertising company, and my health started suffering again. And I could start feeling those panic and anxiety attacks, but they came back in a different way. Lutz and Dr. Ken, it wasn't about nausea. It felt now like a heart attack. And I'd wake up at night with chest pain and shortness of breath. My wife rushed me to ER one night, 2 o'clock in the morning with my son in the car. And I realized that I was convinced I had a heart problem, and I went to 3 different cardiologists.
Yes.
And they said, it's all in your head. And it was quite ironic because I'm a mindfulness coach at that stage. But really the stress that I went through working with a business partner that was corrupt, and I realized that I had to change my life. So I'm very grateful to my corrupt business partner, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have closed that door. I mean, my father-in-law thought I was insane, walking away from your own company, you're the managing director and you resigned. But I walked into the mindful world, the corporate mindful world, and it's been absolutely remarkable. So that was really the big leap. It was a place of getting away from suffering and deciding to just follow your heart. And my wife was always on about, just follow your heart, Mark. Just follow your heart. Don't do what's expected of you. Don't do what other people want you to do. Just follow your heart. And, I took the leap, and it's been amazing. It's, I can honestly say, if you're thinking about it and you want to change your life, just go for it. Just do it.
Mark, I listened to your story, and having watched from the sidelines, sometimes very close, sometimes very far, but just seeing your incredible growth in this space has just been amazing. The story you just shared is, and in fact your introduction, very, very vulnerable, and I take my hat off to the bravery of telling that story. I'm sure that many people feel that too, and are frightened to talk of that. What comes to mind though is your deep experience. You've scraped your knees. You understand this journey. I see so often. I hear of, and with no disrespect, a coach that's in their early 20s or just striking 28 and coaching. And I think that must be very, very difficult. There's so much responsibility attached to the work that you do. And I just think it's beautiful that you've got such a strong journey supporting your work. Mark?
Can I just come in? I mean, Mark, what's interesting was how you were saying that despite that you were a mindfulness coach, that 2 years ago, you felt these sort of attacks or stressful attacks. And what hit me was how stress can creep up on us or creep in us without us realizing it. And one of the things that Lutz and myself have spoken about is when somebody moves from what I call their normal lives and they have an experience in nature and they reconnect to nature, there's a process that unfolds within themselves that in a way de-stresses them and reconnects them to the energy around them. I think the mindfulness process, and maybe you could just add a little bit more to this, Lucy, if it's okay with you, just is a process of reconnecting the individual back to himself in a way. Would I be right in assuming that?
100%, Dr. Ken. It's we lack connection in this modern age. We've lost connection with ourselves. We've lost connection with each other, and we've lost connection with nature. And mindfulness is really all about just connecting us back to our essential self, and in doing that, I mean, we know that we need to take breaks, and we know we need to look after our mental health. But in the modern world of technology and busyness, it's amazing when I facilitate and I speak to people in the corporate world, they are working flat out. And the productivity, the science of productivity says we should be taking a break, a 15-minute break every 90 minutes. But people are not detaching. They're not unplugging. They're not detoxing. And when I say detoxing, I'm talking about their daily activities, their life, their jobs. And you need to walk away sometimes. You need to, even if it's 15 minutes, and connect with nature. If you can, go into the garden, take off your shoes, feel the grass underneath your feet, hug a tree, look at the birds, look at the sky, look at the clouds. And I'm constantly, that's probably my main message now with the corporate world is, and especially being in lockdown, is get out of create space for yourself. Make space for yourself, because we feel as though the world's coming down on us. We're in our little house. Our families are with us. Our kids are with us. We don't have space. And now more than ever, we need space. We need to create more space, because that's what's affecting our mental health. And it's that connection, Dr. Ken, that we are not connected to how we're really doing. We're not connected to how we are, the connection we have with our friends and our family or our colleagues. That has completely gone out the window, even on the digital platform. Everyone's got their cameras off, their microphones on mute. We don't know how you're doing. And I find that just connecting with nature obviously it's such a real mindful experience, that we can look at the sky and we can realize that the world is so much bigger than we are. It's so much bigger than the meeting that we've just had, or the problem that we're facing. There's so much. And I think, living in Cape Town or living in a beautiful place, you look up and there's Table Mountain, and it's always a reminder that nature is so much bigger than us. Whereas in Joburg, we look up, we don't see that. We see buildings, or we see apartment blocks, and that's the disconnection.
Mark, sorry, Ken, as we jump into it, two things are springing to mind. The one is more of a statement, and the second is more of a request to you. The first is, I think we're becoming eco-alienated to some level. I really feel this eco-alienation, and I think what Ken and I have really been trying to do is to try and re-establish that connection to exactly what you're talking about. What strikes me is you talking at an urban level of the impact of nature, and what we're going to be doing is in big space. It's in wilderness, which I think is going to just take it all to the next level. But my question to you is, we've jumped straight into it. What is mindfulness? I mean, what is the definition of mindfulness for somebody that's not aware of it?
Yeah, no, it's you have to grow a really long beard, and you have to wear a robe, and you have to sit on a mountain and chant Om. No, I'm joking. So that there's a stigma to meditation and mindfulness, and I'm going to use the definition by Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, who popularized mindfulness in the 1980s, and he did his work at the University of Massachusetts, and his work was groundbreaking. He published a book called Full Catastrophe Living, which is like a huge doorstop book, and it's all about the success of his program in terms of managing stress and pain management, actually, believe it or not. So his definition is, mindfulness can be cultivated by paying attention on purpose in a particular way, that is, in the present moment, and with three attitudes of non-reactivity, non-judgment, and open-heartedness. So it's a mouthful, eh? I'll say it again. Mindfulness can be cultivated by paying attention on purpose in a particular way, in the present moment, and by cultivating three attitudes of non-reactivity, non-judgment, and open-heartedness. And there are shorter definitions. Some people say, well, it's merely just to be aware. The ancient Indian translation of mindfulness is the word sati. It's a Sanskrit word which means to remember, to come back to. But anyway, I run a train the trainer program, so I'm responsible for training teachers, mindfulness facilitators. It's the only training program in the country for this kind of work. And as Lutz said, it's been 20 years in the making. And I use that definition it's a 13-week program, but that definition, we unpack that throughout the 13-week journey. It's such a powerful definition. And I can't wait to get into nature. I can't wait to get out there and use that definition to connect with our environments and ourselves with that definition, and really explore that, because there's so much there. So yeah, that's in essence what mindfulness is.
Yeah, Mark, I mean, there is so much to that definition. Lutz, you and I, we unpack a couple of concepts in that, but just that definition, I mean, there is so much to it, in terms of, for example, the attitude that one must have, the attitude of non-judgmental attitude, or the attitude of an open heart. I mean, it certainly links to the attitude that Lutz and myself were talking about when people come on a walk, or they enter into nature. Is what is the attitude? Because a lot of times people, whenever they sort of enter into an experience, there are expectations, there are assumptions, they've got some sort of like story in their own mind about how it's going to be.
Yeah.
And one of the things is that how can we enter into something with more or less an open mind and open heart, and encounter the reality?
Wow, I'm loving that question. Thank you.
Yeah.
So and brilliant about linking those mindful attitudes to the experience of being out in nature and in the open. And it's in the corporate world, we encourage people to move from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And I run programs for leaders on change management and so on, helping people to adapt to change. And as you can imagine, that's very popular in the current climate in the working environments. But we can use that same principle out there in nature, because now we've removed ourselves from all our familiar trappings, you could say. And we're in a completely, our entire environment has changed. And we automatically would start feeling these feelings of sort of maybe reactivity or judgment or whatever, maybe even a closed down of heart. So it's about encouraging us to move from that very fixed mindset into an expansiveness of that growth mindset, and to go into this experience and to look at the first one of non-reactivity, and rather be more responsive. How can I respond rather than react? How can we encourage that? And that responsiveness, Dr. Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies my power to choose. And in that lies my freedom and my growth. So it's about just creating that space, about helping people to find that space in the beautiful supportive settings, without the cell phones, without the constant bombardment of traffic or their families, etc., to create a space. And in that space, they can get to connect with being more responsive than reactive, to go into that experience with curiosity, with open eyes, with a beginner's mind, as to, wow, let me be open to this experience. And that's why I love what you've named this, the inner adventure. The inner adventure, I mean, it's an adventure that we're going on. It's a physical adventure, but at the same time, it's a deep inner adventure. And to be curious about that, and to see it, wow, backpacking through India for 6 months to a year. You just have this mindset that this is an adventure, and it changes the whole experience into a wondrous occasion. And then, of course, acceptance and open-hearted. So whatever happens, we accept that this is part of the adventure, and opening up to that acceptance then removes so many boundaries between each other. It establishes that connection again with ourselves, with our friends and family, and of course with nature. So yes, it's a great question, Dr. Ken. Thank you.
Mark, if I may ask that, how did you find, if we step back into the context of big space, How did the Himalayas influence your thinking? So you were under incredible mentorship, but how did the mountains, how did the big space influence your thinking?
Well, Lutz, for me, that's where the real journey started. It was getting out of the city. It was getting out of Delhi and Mumbai. I mean, you just, those places are ridiculous, you know. I mean, I love them, but in terms of being crowded, and you know, I realized the one day,
anxiousness, eh?
Especially now with COVID. I mean, you don't want to be in those streets. I remember being in the street, and then I remember going to my hotel and looking down and seeing people swarming, and I thought to myself, my word, I was actually in there, you know. But when you're in there, you don't realize it. And it's the same as your mind. Our minds are so busy. Our minds are so busy. But if you take a step from a different perspective, you see just how busy it is. But when you're in it, you don't realize that you need a break. You don't realize that you need to get away. So I went with my girlfriend at that time. We went into, we were fortunate enough to take a Sherpa, and we went into what is known as the Langtang region of the Himalayas. It's not very commercial. So we walked through villages where the locals had never seen. I mean, I've got darker skin, but my girlfriend at the time was blonde, and they freaked out. They couldn't believe that this girl had yellow hair, you know. I mean, that's how remote it was. And then we went up to about 3,500 to 4,000 meters. And we stayed at a monastery there, totally surrounded by the massive mountains. And I know, Lutz, you love the mountains, and you've climbed Chamonix and Alps, and, you know, you ice waterfall climbing. I mean, you are unbelievably extreme and brave. But, I mean, you would have loved the setting. It was this ancient Tibetan monastery, 500 years old, surrounded by the snow mountains of the Himalayas. And there we started our meditation practice. And I get tingles over my body just talking about it, because I would not have had the same experience in Kathmandu as I did there. It was deep, you know, it was so deep. It was so incredible that it was so far that there was no spaza shop, or, you know, the Sherpas had to bring the rice and the food, and the monks grew their own vegetables. And we lived there for a few weeks, and it changed something in me. And the humility of the monks and their connection to the garden, to nature, to going to the river, to channeling the water that flows from the streams that come down the mountain. It was just life-changing for me. And I was never a nature person. I was always a city boy, city slicker. And fortunately, I dated a girl who, at the drop of the hat, we would leave the city. We would go to the Drakensberg. We would go to the mountains, the forests, on hiking expeditions to connect with nature. And it changed my life. It changed my mind, and was a huge part of my mindfulness journey, is being in nature. And even to this day, we take people away on retreats. We have a retreat facility out in Groot Mariko. And I mean, there's nothing in Groot Mariko, I can tell you that. So there's just, you know, really out there in the bush. And we do stargazing at night. We lie on our backs. We look at the stars. I know in the Kruger, the stars are amazing. Groot Mariko is the same. We just listen to the crackling of the fire, and we gaze at the stars. And there's nothing better than that. There's really nothing better than that. And yes, there are urban retreat centers, but you got to get away for that deep essence of mind, because there's a very subtle level of mind that we never really experience, because it's gross in the city. We're a very gross-minded being in our city environment. But when all the external distractions are quieted, we are then able to go more inward, the inner adventure. And that once you've tapped that, once you've felt that, your life will never be the same.
Ken, I'm wondering if we're running near our time.
I mean, look,
you thinking anything?
I mean, I'm sitting here just deep in thought, you know, on a couple of things, you know, just in terms of that you'll never be the same again after an experience with nature that touches or connects one with mind, with heart, with spirit, you know, in a very integrative way. That you'll never be the same again, because you experience something that is so deep and is so connective to the essence of who we are, which is very much part of nature, you know, and being enveloped in nature. So that's the one thing that I'll hit me, and then just to finish this one about space, Lutz. You know, as we're looking at each other, we are in a room with 4 walls, and you know, you constantly talk, Lutz, about big space, open space. Is that when we get outside, when we get outdoors, and even if we don't have the facilities of going into a nature reserve somewhere, we can spend time outside connecting to clouds, to flowers, to the little insects walking around us, to just stopping your daily rush and looking, having that intention to notice. And as you notice and as you observe, to observe in an open, curious way. I think this was a fundamental message that I picked up from what Mark was saying, and it links very strongly to the whole journey that I'm on, besides psychology, is the photographic journey. You know, to have this intention to notice with an open heart. So Mark, it's been fascinating speaking with you, and
thanks.
Yeah, and I mean, we could continue speaking more and more, but yeah, Lutz, that's just some of my concluding thoughts.
Mark, I love what you say, and you sound like the most amazing mindfulness practitioner yourself, Dr. Ken. So thank you for that insight.
Thank you.
I can certainly vouch for Ken. He is an exceptional human being. I can vouch for that. I think of your messages, and I'm thinking we almost need to have another discussion at another stage and tap into this deeper, because I don't think we've touched the tip of the iceberg. I think what strikes me is mindfulness can actually bring us closer to our core. It brings us back to this principle of we are part of nature rather than a part of nature. So it shifts from this eco-alienation to coming back to seeing that we're part of this big thing, and it is all connected. We've loved our discussion. It's the time has run out. It's been far too short, and you're surely tired of me saying that, because I repeat it. The time really has been far too short. Mark, it's been a great pleasure having you on the inner adventure. I wish you the greatest of success in all of your endeavors. You're doing amazing work, and South Africa is grateful for your work. If you enjoyed this, share, hit the like button. Until next time, we bid you goodbye. All the very best. Stay safe. Best wishes.
Thank you. It's been amazing being here. Thank you very much for the opportunity, guys. Thank you.